Then we'll do a data cafe where we'll look at the data from last year. And there'll be some reflective questions in small groups. We'll just talk a little bit about what we found out. And then we'll look at the theory of change, which is the theory that we came up with last year when we sat on the findings from year one and we said, okay, in year one, I think this is what we learned about the theory behind why we do what we do, a formula, if you wish. And now, after you have looked at the data, the formula, we're going to look at the formula again and say, okay, does this make sense? Or did we invent something last year that doesn't stand based on what we learned in year two? Again, no right or wrong. We're all in discovery together. And then there's some findings that came up from our year two work around how the training lands differently for officers and for community members. And based on that, we want to make some adaptations this year in terms of how we look at it. And so I would love input from you all in terms of where you stand in the program, right? Because I'm the outsider. I have the gift of the outsider view for you, and you have the gift of the insider view for me. And together we put together a puzzle. So in planning the developmental evaluation, which is really just an inquiry, it's like, okay, there's this thing, it's a box, we have no clue what's in the box. How are we going to discover what's in the box? That's pretty much what developmental evaluation is. It's not based on outcomes, it's not based on objectives, it's just like, okay, there's something in there, we have no clue what it is, how are we going to discover it? And so we'll do a little work together to set up, I'll ask you to give me input on how we should set it up so that it's relevant to you and where you stand in relation to this project. And then we'll have a closing, and then I'll ask you to evaluate the meeting and give me feedback on Post-its. So any questions about the flow? Okay. I know that you're aware that we have a media crew. So there are release forms under your chairs. Please make sure that you sign one, probably if we take a break or before the end. Actually, let's do a designated place.
Many of you have already. Yeah.
No, many have. Okay, all right. So make sure you sign it. We have a few opt-out choices. So you know that in this project, trust and vulnerability are really valued. So we thank you all for this opportunity to have the outsider of the outsider witness, right? You guys are witnessing in a different way what we're doing. And again, it's a beautiful opportunity for us to be able to see ourselves while we do the work, afterwards. Although that's not the purpose of the documentary, I'm not saying it is, but in generally that's what documentary making does, is it provides a witness and an outside view on something. So thank you for the gift of being here, and we know that vulnerability is really important for us. So, so we have a few opt-out options. So one is that you opt out completely and be outside of the frame, and I know that's the case, right, for the officer. And the other is that you can opt out in terms of visual, audio, or both. Okay, so you could decide you just don't want to be visibly seen, and then you can sit in a place, we'll talk with the videographers and have you sit in a place where you're not visible, or you can just ask when you speak, we can stop the video, or both. Okay? So is there anyone, I know that the officers outside of the, what's your name?
Jim.
I can call you Jim?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, I know Jim's out of the frame.
Awesome.
I
was born a lieutenant.
I know. I love it. So Jim, I know Jim's out of the frame. Is there anyone else who wants to be out of the frame, which means not videotaped at all? Okay, so folks are okay with that. All right. So I'd like us to create a sign for when we want the videographers to stop, because I still would like you, Jim, to participate in the meeting, and so I'm going to ask them to stop each time that you speak. And I'm going to forget, so I'm going to leave it up to you to remember. Right? Is it timeout? Is that what it's like? Okay, great.
The universal.
All right, perfect. All right, let's do that. So when someone gives the signal, we'll probably say timeout so that you hear it, because you may miss one person giving signal, okay? And then we'll just say you can start again, I guess. All right? Does that work for folks in terms of agreements and safety? Yeah. Cool. We really are committed to not having this become a phony space because they're cameras.
Yes, that's.
Okay, so we trust you to ask for what you need.
Yeah. So one more thing, we have one, possibly two additional people coming, at some point. It sounds like it's gonna be.
Soon.
Soon?
Actually,
Okay.
yeah.
So we'll need to at some, I wanna keep the flow of this going, and I'm aware that, when they do arrive, we'll have to kind of manage that, so, we'll tend to that when they
Okay,
arrive.
beautiful.
Cool.
So any other logistics, bathrooms?
Bathrooms are, we're gonna go all the way around through the door that we entered in.
Yeah.
But when you come up that first set of doors, you're gonna make a right and you'll see the bathroom doors kind of, it's open right there.
Beautiful. And the other little elephant in the room, I'm sure you noticed that I'm alone, which is very unusual for me. You know that I do this work always in collaboration. This year, we're in a transition year with the grant, and so we pulled our strap a little tighter, and we know that there's continuity coming on the front moving forward. So one of the reasons I do this work in collaboration is because everyone has blind spots, and I know I have my own, and I'm always aware to what it means to be white in this work. So if my underpants start showing, just let me know. So with Rita, can you think a second about what you said? Right? Are there some assumptions you're making? I'm used to that interaction. That's typically what I do on my team, is have that constant confrontation of where are blind spots? Check me, I check you. So today you're my team. So feel free to check my blind spots if they were to show up. Anything else? Any other elephants in the room not handled? Are we free to do our work now? Okay, wonderful. So I'd like to ask you to stand up and encircle shoulder to shoulder. Just with one word, set an intention for where we want to go today. Just one word.
Unveiling.
Discovery. Progress. Vulnerability.
Honesty.
Understanding.
Legacy. All right. Off we go. So we're going to start. There's a method to the madness. We're going to start with a circle. Many of you know that circle practice, which is what we'll do. Yeah. I was going to. Okay, there you go. So that'll be our question today to guide our circle together. And it's, tell us a story about one way this work inspired, transformed, or challenged you. And I just want to tell you something about circle practice. So in circle practice, everyone speaks one at a time. The famous saying is no crosstalk, right? So, which means that everyone speaks with intention, saying exactly what needs to be said, and feeling it in the moment, not preparing it while someone else is talking, right? So being present in the moment and sharing what needs to be said, and at the same time, listening with intention when someone else is speaking. And we're just going to go in a circle. Our tangerine will be the talking piece, because part of what we're wrestling with today are the fruits of our labor, right? And how to get our harvest to be bigger. We're ambitious and we want a bigger and deeper harvest, I would say. So I'll pass the talking piece, and when you're holding it, it's a way to remind you to speak with intention. Really what needs to be said, what I need to say, what is close to my heart. And it also reminds us when someone else is holding it that we're paying attention to them. And many of you know that circle practice is a very, very ancient practice. So most indigenous communities practice circle practice as council of elders. In Africa, in the Americas, Native American cultures use circle practice, and it was really a way to weigh in the wisdom of the whole community because there's something magical that happens when we're listening to each and every person in a new way. So I use a talking piece, and Native Americans use a talking stick. I use a talking piece instead of a talking stick because I'm not Native American, and so it's a conscious choice to not culturally appropriate or lessen the cultural appropriation. It's really a phenomenal tool, and so we use it for that reason, and we honor the cultures before us who have created this process. So that being said, the circle at the beginning of a meeting is also an opportunity for us to just be human together. We come to meetings with a lot of preconceptions about what a meeting is and how we need to be professional and keep it together and, check your life at the door. I'm not asking you to check your life at the door. I'm asking you to bring all the wisdom of who you are as mother, grandmother, daughter, child, father, athlete, whatever your profession is. Like, I'm asking you to bring it all. Artist, I'm asking you to bring it all. Because I believe that 360-degree human is the biggest and deepest wisdom that we have to offer each other. So with that being said, I'm going to place the tangerine at the center of the circle. And whoever is ready to speak first can do so. Tell us a story about one way this work inspired, transformed, or challenged you. And I'll be taking notes. So hopefully I can offer you something later. I can feed it back to you later.
So hey, my name is Will.
And Will, when you're done, you can just hand it over to your left.
Gotcha.
To your right. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Inspired, transformed, and challenged. So I would kind of say that moment or one scenario where that actually happened, I would say it was like all at one point, right? And I look to you because you were there for this. There was a day of healing that happened in the South Ward that we were kind of responsible for getting together and getting folks in the room for and having conversations. And during that day, there were a lot of powerful speakers. There were some young people that were there that were kind of incorporated into the program. There was a young man who talked about his own journey. And Fatima was there kind of helping kind of facilitate a lot of these conversations because they were quite delicate. And at that point, I think when we started talking about humanity, I was at my most human level, right? Like at that point, I saw the trauma in my life in relation to everyone around me in the community around me. So I was like in the back on the ground crying, right? And at that point, it was clear to me that I had traumas that I needed to work through for myself. But understanding where I am in relation to the world around me, right? So like, I've got a job, I've got a support system, I've got people around me that care for me. And if I'm feeling this way in that position, I can only imagine what other people within the community that don't have those things, right? Like what they're going through. And I think at that point, it was a transformative piece in my life because from there, I understood how deep and like how real the trauma was in our communities and how important it was for us to really start calling it out and really talking about it. Not just with police, but like all of our systems, not just one-on-one, but the actual systems themselves, these broader structures that influence our lives on a daily basis that we might not even see. So I think for me, it was that point in the back of that auditorium that day that made this all real for me. And am I right?
Thank you, Will.
Yeah.
Wow. I was there that day also, and it was extraordinarily powerful. And it's my first one that Fatima can sing. I always reference that. I'm Monique. And as I think about this Inspire, Transform Challenge, like what keeps coming to mind, I'm not even sure if it just fits in one, it kind of feels like it fits in all, is how I approach this work and the dichotomy between how I approach the work and then what happens to me when I engage. And so what I typically kind of approach training and just even, how I look at the work that I'm doing from a kind of very cognitive, very professional standpoint. But then when I'm in it, when I'm interacting, particularly when we were doing the trainings, something happens. That's a moment for me, and it happens just about each and every time, where that humanity comes in, and it's no longer, and I guess maybe that's transformation. It's no longer about, you know, right or wrong. It's no longer about, you know, just keeping everything clean and neat and professional. It's about connecting with human beings and transforming lives, and it comes real every time. And for me, that's kind of like, that's the inspiration, transformation, and it's always often very challenging.
Thank you. Can I pass it to still think, please?
And then it'll come back to you.
Great, thank you.
I didn't know you were good.
Yeah, a minute more.
This is an excellent question and challenging for me because there's so many stories. And as the one who started this work, it's like, which one do I? So I'm gonna just, can I cheat a little and pluck a few? One. I heard you. All right. All right. Well, what's alive for me right now is going back to the moment you
If you
shared.
cheat, I won't do anything.
Oh, okay. Well, what's alive for me is the day of healing, because we have these trainings, but then we do trauma work all the time, right? Our trauma work extends, and so it was a really powerful day because we did a march, and then we were in an auditorium, and there were all these speakers, and actually Barbara and I went up to share, like okay, let's talk about trauma. And it's an auditorium in a school, right? It was like, and there's this young man sitting in the audience, and I made eye contact with him, and he was speaking, and I asked him to come on stage because it was hard for me to hear him, but it was hard for others to hear him, and I knew what he was saying was powerful. It was a young African American man. I think he was about 17 or 18, and he came up on stage and he sat right beside me, and he shared the story about being shot several times, and that the trauma was how it affected his mother. It was like, and my mom went through so much. And so I said to him, I was like, yes, your mom went through so much, and you went through so much. Like you actually lived through being shot multiple times. And I kept saying over and over again how precious he was and how much we are grateful that he lived through that to tell the story today. And I just asked the audience to say over and over again to him that we love him. And he started to shake, and we all started to cry. And it was like this moment of getting how important his life is, because how often do those messages go out to young men like him? And it was just such a profound moment of recognizing how intergenerational and community and individual, how that trauma just permeates. And I was so grateful to have been in that, like done that and been in that with him for all of us, because we have to be able to do that with one another. And that's what we do in the room. That's what we do. We are touching. People are trusting us to share something, peer into their lives, and particularly when we're talking about violence. And so, I'm thinking of another story where we had an officer who had been working with us. He was the one who was like with us from the beginning, and really appreciates this work. And he's on the SWAT team, and went into and there was an active shooter, and he one of the officers on his team actually got shot, and but had the gear on, so was injured but wasn't fatally wounded. And he said that at that moment they could have used lethal force, right? Because an active shooter actually shot somebody, an officer. But because of the trauma training he was able to, and his own training, obviously, he was able to kind of de-escalate the group and actually peaceably get that man out of the house without harming him, and the mom was home, there's a child home, and I was like, that's the potential of this work. Like that's what we're fighting for, right? That in those moments when people are making those decisions, they are remembering just how critically important it is that that they use the best of their training to do what they can to save every single life. So those were the ones that were like just gut wrenchingly like inspiring and transformative, and just remind me in whose name we're doing this work.
I have two that I'm struggling with, but I'm gonna give the one that I think really. I'll sum it up real quick. So the one that really inspired me was there was this young lady at our most recent training, our last training, a young 17-year-old who shared her story, and it wasn't necessarily related to law enforcement or anything that happened with that, but just talking about her experience of not having a father present and the residual effects of that through her life and the trauma that she experienced, whether that was in her home or in relationships with other men in the community, and how she was still living through that, and those and the symptoms were active. And the beautiful thing was in that training was it was at a point where things had gotten a little contentious, and she actually stood up at that point and began to share her story, and she started crying, and all of a sudden the village rallied around this young lady and just enveloped her and embraced her, to the point where she came back and said, I started crying, I had to come back and finish my story. So she came back a second time with Fatima's help, and on multiple different levels for me, that was just a really powerful moment, because it was transformative not only for in the moment, but I do believe that it had a transformative effect on her, because I believe that it began her path towards healing. It would be cool to follow up with that young lady actually to find out. And then another moment that challenged me, that continues to challenge me, was between a member of the Newark Community Street Team and a officer, lady officer, and you can see from a clinical standpoint, right? You can see their defenses kind of come up, and they were both screaming in the moment, like, "You're not listening to me," and they were not screaming, but it was underneath. That's the message that they were getting, like, "You don't hear me," and it was challenging because there was no resolution really to that tension. But what I loved about it was the tension, instead of it being latent and underneath, it was expressed and it was talked about. It didn't make nobody feel good, but I don't think the purpose was for anybody to feel good. I think it was for people to realize what existed. And I loved that experience. It was inspiringly challenging. If I gotta mix up two words, right? It was just, it's kind of what we want. It's not kind of, it is what we want to see happen. And it reminded me that what we do isn't pretty. There's no bows, there's no flowers, there's no rainbows that happen when we're done. Oftentimes it feels like explosions behind your head, right? But it was a beautiful moment, and it's something that I want to continue to see and continue to help people walk through, no matter the outcome.
All right. I just want to share something before I actually get to my story.
Thank you.
I'll pass it back to you at the end.
Right.
Yeah. It's a little hard to share. I'll go there. So when we started this work in year one, so it's no mystery that my heart is with community, right? And when I started this work, I see now that my heart was definitely more open to community than it was to officers. And I went to a retreat
for people who focus on group healing. It was the retreat where the moss comment came off. For those of you who were there, the green moss comment, it was that situation.
Oh, the Spanish
Spanish
moss.
moss.
Spanish moss, yeah.
I talked about Spanish moss and the whole team went crazy because it was like so out of context for them, righteously. So I was at a retreat with people who work on group healing, and we were using a technique called family constellations that is a way to heal intergenerational trauma by having people in a group create a situation similar to the family situation. And what you discover is that people who know nothing about your family situation end up playing it out exactly the way it played out, because there's ways in which human beings mirror each other, and there's a lot you can discover working with people who have like no idea of what your particular family situation is. And this was we chose to constellate the whole of like American society in the moment. And so Black Lives Matter was in the constellation, and All Lives Matter was in the constellation, and patriarchy and racism were in the constellation. So people were choosing to embody this to discover what they could discover, right? And someone hands me a chart, because you have to like hold something when you're embodying that. And someone hands me Blue Lives Matter. Get in. You have to do this. And I'm like, oh, okay, very resistant, but I get in. And again, this is an expression that often sounds like a cliche, but I felt in my body that I just want to get home safely. Like, all I want out of this day is to get home okay. Please, God, let me get home okay. And that, please, God, let me get home okay, was a chant. And it was a chant in my head like an obsession that turned into like a knot in my stomach. To the point where the experience I was having was just completely collapsed on myself. It was like, I just want to get home, I just want to get home, I just want to get home. And I in the end I had to scream. It was so heavy that I had to scream, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. And the whole group was shocked, and I just had to let it out because it was so heavy. And from that day, something shifted. So from that day, I got humble about, I have no freaking clue what it's like to wear that beautiful, right? Like, I don't know. And that glimpse of like a half an hour taught me a ton about the humanity behind the uniform. And I think it had me become a lot more empathic. And one of you said like the humanity on both sides, like where's our common humanity? Like that really came alive for me in a totally new way. And so it's an experience that I didn't have with you all, but I had because of the work we were doing together. Like I was in that question of how do I improve my service in this role? Yeah, and I stand for a world where no one has to worry about getting home safe, no matter what they're wearing.
Wow. Well, I'm Hannah, and I participated in the trauma-informed care workshops because it was all about me. It was about me and who I was. I'm a pastor. I'm a CEO of an organization for community services. As a pastor, I get stories all the time about what's happened in the community, and what's happened to my child, and what's happened to my grandchild, and what's happened to my husband, and what's happened to my wife. With my community organization, we have contracts where we're dealing with prisoner reentry. And I'm dealing all the time with youth and what happened to them, and stories of women who've been incarcerated that they said when the gavel hit, they almost fainted because they could not believe that for 7 years they would no longer be able to participate in society, and the separation anxiety hit them all at once about what's going to happen to my children. It's being a mother of a daughter who has a long history of being a victim of domestic violence. It's about being a grandmother that takes the responsibility for her children, and then, taking responsibility for my grandchild, and then having a great-grandchild that I've taken custody of because of situations of trauma. So when I came to the table, I met a gentleman by the name of Walter Thompson. And he says, Pastor Pam, I need you to do something, because I was talking to him about all that was going on and how people don't care and how something needs to be in place to bring people together. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of evidence that people are not coping with what's going on in their lives. Rather, they're putting on these facades and they're trying to pretend to be what they're not, and there's just no realism. And I just was talking to him in general as a colleague, and he says, I got somewhere for you to go. He says, here's a flyer. And I read the flyer and I says, I don't know, is this another one of these programs that you just go and, it's for the city of Newark, and is it just something where you're talking about these things and nothing is going to come of it? And he says, nah. He says, you got to just meet Fatima. She's really serious about this, and I think that you'll fit in really well. Well, I went to the class, and my story is I just wanted to get a realistic approach by which you deal with people that are hurting, people who've experienced trauma, just having so much of it, and it just falling all on me. And I needed a place to just be able to see how to overcome. And it happened when Fatima said, she said, it's not that, and I'll never forget this, when she stood there and said, and this is when she got my attention, it's not what's happened. I mean, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you. And that moment, I was in. Because I went to see if this was something, was I going to go to the next one, and I was, health-wise, I wasn't feeling too well, and I was trying to really find out what would be best. So in going to the class, there were several things that happened. One, in all that I had seen from a trauma experience and exposure, secondary trauma, primary trauma, I was just taking a look at all of the facets of it. And I found that in being in the same room with the police officers really gave me the right experience that I was looking for. Because from all that I had heard, I had one perception that with my youth that had been incarcerated, that the officers didn't understand, these children were being mishandled, the court system was violating their rights. When I looked at the women, the same thing. I'm talking to sisters inside, we're talking about being raped inside, and all types of things are happening with them. And I was just looking at it all from the perspective of, it's your fault. It's your fault. Because if you did this better, then it would be a difference. But I learned. When I listened to the officers, and when they started talking about every day, and there was one lady officer that really got to me. She says, I have children. I'm at work. But unlike you, when I go to work, I don't know if I'm going to come home alive or not. My job entails a life or death situation, and it could escalate, it could de-escalate, but that's what I face every day. And here I am thinking that my job, I've got all of the traumatic experiences, and I've got all of the answers to the problems, and it's you, and it shifted me. And that's why I'm saying it's all about me. It shifted me to having a different understanding from different perspectives, where it gave opportunity for people to be able to speak. I loved the dynamic. It was no preset agenda per se, but it kind of evolved as you went along. It was like riding on the waves. And there we were all together, like, you know, everybody was a part of this party, and we were just riding the waves, and you would get involved, and then you found yourself all intense and moving in the direction of the wave. There were sometimes it was like a frightening wave. The water seemed like it was getting too high. You couldn't get your balance. You know, all of that was happening. But then when we landed at the end, there was so much that you learned about that wave, that whereas you never thought that you were going to surf, you became a surfer. And you landed on your feet, and it was okay. And there were tragedies. There was the face of almost like, you know, situations where you didn't know if you were going to come out the right way because you were sitting there so intense that you wanted to jump in, you wanted to say something, and then it all ended up to be all right because you were allowed to have a perspective. And I've never had that experience before. I've never had that experience before. It's like you have to be dignified, you have to sit there with your legs crossed, and you know, you're in a meeting, you know, and just make sure you don't have the wrong perception. You're a pastor, you know, you're a CEO of a company, you've got to, never had I had the experience of the realism, and that's what Warren and I were talking about, the realism of really trying to come together where help would be provided, and we're helping each other. There was no one at the front that was like, you know, and write this down, and you know, it was more that everybody, it was emerging, everybody was participating, and you were able to grow at your pace. You were able to absorb all that you needed to absorb, pick and choose from the menu, because there were so many menus throughout the course of the day. Everything occurred. It wasn't just one area, it was like all of the areas that you never get a chance to touch upon. Those things happened, they occurred, and it made you respectful. It brought you to the realization, don't assume. Assumptions are not good. You have to understand experiences. And it gave the breadth of experiences. All of us at the table together, sharing through others' experiences, giving you a different lens by which you could see what's really going on in this world. And that's what I walked away with. And then I kind of held on to it. And I couldn't let go of it. I was talking to Fatima, you know, I want to be a part of this. Like, this is a movement. This is really good because I had the buy-in. It helped me from a personal perspective, not only to get my arms around me, but then to open up to be a person of embrace of others and not to have a myopic view anymore. Like, you know, you see all of this and now you've got the answers. No, it's a lot. There's a lot that plays into every aspect of each and every incident that occurs, and it stops me now when I see the news on television. I see the news and I say, sensationalism, because there's a lot more to this story. It's a lot more that they're not saying. And then it makes me begin to think, and it makes me tell my family, there's a lot more to this story than what's on television. And you just need to think about all aspects of it, not only from what you have seen, but you need to just set yourself in the position and see this reenacted on your own, and then think of all of the dynamics. And that's the way you need to look at things. It's all of the dynamics that make it work. It's all of the dynamics that make the difference. It's all of that. And so I'm just so happy for this program because that's what it does. It's all encompassing. And I just appreciate that from the clinical perspective. I'm not as in tune to the clinical aspects of this work, but now I am to a certain degree. So it's not just from the perspective of feelings and interaction. There's something substantive that goes along with it that then gives it the best platform possible because you've covered every area. It's very professional, and then it can be unprofessional. It could just be just say what you want to say. You know, no opinion here, but it just gives the platform every agenda needed to bring you across. And I feel it's a bridge to bring you over. And that's what I look at this program as. This was my bridge. It was about me. It was my bridge to bring me over. That's what I see.
So actually, Lionel, when I did finally think of something, Lionel brought up the incident that I was going to speak of. So I'm glad a lot of other people went after that because then it gave me time to think of more. But another incident, in addition to that experience with was much, much earlier on in the work when we had a visioning session. And this was at the beginning. So it's different when you're planning and you talk about what this work and what you think it's going to be. And then we had our first visioning session and you experience it. And in that first visioning session, it really was the moment where it continued to inspire, transform, and more importantly, challenge me. Because there was an officer in the room and, one of the community members brought up the Eric Gardner case. And it was still very fresh. And, I think around that time, regardless of what side you were on, the fact that the man couldn't breathe was disheartening for either side. And the officer made a comment about, I can't remember everything, but what I will remember is the officer said, "It's the law," and he continuously would say, "It's the law, da 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 da, it's the law, da da da." I mean, he just went through so many scenarios about everything wrong, and then community members were saying, "But this," and he just continuously was shooting out, "It's the law, it's the law," and people just continuously was getting upset and upset. And after a while, for me in that moment, of course, because you come in, you try to be all professional, but you're human, and you have your own biases, you have your own perceptions, and it was so easy to get caught up in my bias, my strong view, and in that moment, I just heard something within myself say, "Just listen and let him finish." And I think just having that within myself allowed me to say in that moment, "Well, hold up, just let him finish what he has to say so we can hear the full story." And then from that, it brought things down a bit. And I think in that moment right there, it really showed me how challenging this work is going to be, but it inspired me to stay committed. Because to do this work, you have to have empathy. In the face of something that could bring about pain and anger, you still have to have empathy to understand. And in doing trauma work, that's what it's about, because people come in with their own traumas that you don't see. Trust me, people walk around as pretty as they can, but behind that beauty, there's trauma. And this work has allowed me to continue to have empathy in spite of. So that was one of the earlier incidents that happened that really inspired, transformed, and challenged.
Thank you. What? Oh, yeah.
Hello, everyone. No, I'm fine. For a minute. Let me think. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. Grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Had my fair share of altercations with law enforcement, and most of those altercations were at the time I was in college. So from those altercations, it was always over nothing. It's me walking to the store. So, in those occasions where we do see people that have lost their lives in those situations, it flares up that anger. And I'm not the only person that's dealt with that. So I feel like, being from a community like Newark and other inner cities, a lot of people have dealt with that, whether or not they are in the streets or not. And I think what my personal anger flared up was because I'm in college. I'm in college. This is not something that like everyone around me was doing, but because I was in that area, I was, automatically thrown in that same kind of category, in that same fire. So I've had some personal growth over the years. One of the areas where I had some personal growth is when I started teaching. Started teaching because I was in film and it wasn't making me any money. And so I started teaching at the school. There's 336 schools in New Jersey. I taught at the one that was academically 333. And this was the high school that we were afraid to go to as children. We were afraid to go to in high school. We said, oh, we ain't going over there. And this is the place where I happened to get assigned. And so once I got assigned there, my perspective changed. So I learned what understanding can do, and I learned what perspective can do. These are people that we would just hear stories from in the beginning. But what it turned out to be was I got to know what their home situations were. I got to know what their neighborhoods were like. I got to know who they were as people, and I started to care about those people. So once you start to care about those people, that's when things shift. So another incident that happened, not incident, but another thing that happened was I have a good friend of mine who is now a police officer. Now we're dealing with somebody that I care about, that I've known since I was a child. That's a police officer. So he didn't get any resistance from us because he was somebody that cared. And he was also there with me during those altercations that I had. So coming from him, we get to argue, we get to talk about certain things, we get to hear his perspective. He knows our perspective, because he lives it. He has children. He grew up in the same neighborhood. So but one thing that it has helped me is to understand that, we're dealing with two sides that want to go on at the end of the day. And I think that once you understand that, you better relationships, and just like, you see those stories on the news, and there are more perspectives, It is sensationalism to a degree. And so once you get to understand both sides, I think that that helps out a lot. And when I see that this program was something that was happening, this is really impactful. And everybody doesn't get the chance to be here. And everybody does not get the chance to have a friend that's in law enforcement. So I think that once you get to experience this and project it and be vulnerable, and then this is the start of change. So yeah.
Can you tell us your name?
My name's Laurent.
Oh, thank you, Laurent. So, just want to read back to you some of what we heard, so you can just kind of be with it a little bit. It's a little long, so I'll probably edit it down later, but it's called a poetry harvest. It's not poetry, there's not enough time for poetry, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of where we came from in our voices. So, Day of Healing in the South Board. Delicate conversations, my most human level, my trauma, your trauma, crying together, trauma in our communities, not just police, all systems. What happens to me when I engage? When I'm in it, something happens, each and every time. Everything not neat and professional, human, and transforming lives. Alive for me. Day of Healing, an auditorium in a school, a young man, 17 or 18 on stage, shared his story, shot several times. My mom went through so much. You are precious. We love you. We are grateful you lived. He shaked, we cried, profound, community, individual, grateful. People trust us to peep into their lives. Officer working with us, active shooter, child at home, he could have shot. He de-escalated the group. Got that man out of that house, child safe. That is this work. Every single life. In whose name do we do this work? A woman, her father not present, her trauma, shared her story. The village rose, embraced her. Officer, defenses, you don't hear me. Challenging, latent tension expressed. Inspiring, challenging. What we do isn't pretty. Sometimes an explosion behind your head. Ambassadors for Newark. Reflect Newark. Big burden. The best police officer I could be. I've seen lots of things. We have to do better, loving and respecting one another. We cannot survive without community. He was shot several times. I did CPR. He died. How unimportant this life had become. It hurts to the core. The value of our worth. Care about each other. I stand for a world where no one has to worry about getting home safe. Youth, mother incarcerated, grandmother, grandchild, great child, trauma. A flyer. Just another program? It's not what's wrong with you. It's what happened to you. Just the experience I was looking for. I had one perception, but I learned. I thought my job had trauma. Different perspectives. The water, the wave. The water seemed high, but when you landed, that wave you thought you could never surf, you landed on your feet. Grow at your pace. Absorb what you need. Don't assume, understand. See what is really going for. The bridge to bring me over. Visioning. Community member Eric Gardner, I Can't Breathe. It was really fresh. Officer, it's the law, it's the law. I try to be professional, but I'm human. Listen, let him finish. Empathy in spite of it all. Born in New Jersey, college, I was teaching high school, the same high school I was afraid to go. My perspective changed. My friend is a police officer, there with me. He knows my perspective. Two sides want to go home at the end of the day. This is the start of change. All right. This is to you guys. To you guys. All right.
That was just the opening read up?
Yep. That was the opening. I was thinking, okay. So, final thoughts before we shake it off and move on? All right. It's, yeah. Okay. All right. All right, folks. Let's do a little shake. Come on. That was deep and intense. Shake it off. Jump around. Okay. All right. Are folks okay transitioning? Something a little bit more brainy? Jado! All right. So at this point, what I'd like you guys to do is to join, to split up in groups of 3. And this is the time where we would move these thingies. So we're going to use these steps as tables. And at each table, there's going to be a theme. So these are some of the things that we measured last year. So we wanted to, so what kind of participants we had, whether their knowledge changed, whether their attitudes changed, behaviors changed, trust changed, or there was system change. So at each table, there are going to be 2 of these topics. I'm going to give you like little pieces of paper where you can see what we found from last year. And I'm just going to give you like 10 or 15 minutes per table to just sit with what you, like read what you have and reflect on it a little bit. Okay? This is really like the foundation for the conversation we're going to have later about theory of change. So I want us to draw in our theory of change conversation both from the experiences you had with the program and what you see, like what we found out in terms of looking at the whole picture. Is that directions clear? Okay, cool. So let's say this, we'll make this table 1, this 2, and this 3. So you can use the top surface as like a writing surface, because we'll have you just take a few notes. And there are questions on these strips of paper over here. So we're going to rearrange the room a little bit.
Are you assigning us groups or do we just go?
You can just go to any group, because we're going to rotate. Doesn't matter.
Should I move this?
Yes. All right, here we go. Cool. There you go. Oh, perfect. Great. So I was thinking you guys can use the highest level as like a little bit of a surface. This is kind of makes a little cool chair, and then the other chairs can gather around it. Yeah, whatever works for you guys. All right. Yeah, thank you. So you guys, so this is where I'd like Monique, Fatima, and if you can split up and be at different tables.
Oh.
That's it. So here you guys have,
So
Okay, so this is for this table?
Yep.
Okay, great.
so you can take one of these. And so for this table, ignore the theory of change. Like
Okay.
you don't have to
Okay.
look at that. Just look at this,
Okay.
these two
Okay.
sections. Okay?
Yeah, yeah,
And there are 3 of those, so you
Okay.
can share them with your participants. Yeah, you can ignore theory of change, just like take a look at. And if you need to like roll and take a break and come back, feel free to do that, because I know that was like, was intense. Yeah, what'd you say?
I'm gonna read this first and then look at these
Okay.
questions.
Good for taking an organic break, that was needed.
Okay. Oh, right here.
So,
Where are we writing our comments?
I didn't have, I didn't think about that. I'm gonna split up some flip chart paper. Give me a second, I'll get you something. No, because this will give you more space so that it'll be easy to type up later. And you don't have to answer the specific questions one at a time. It's more like, yeah, discussion, thinking about it in discussion if you want to take some notes. And if you have questions, I'm here. You guys can take some notes here if you like.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah,
thus far.
this is
Gotcha.
just year 2, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Before we move on, well, first let's create the circle again so that we're.
Yeah.
So I have a question. For this section where you're just giving us feedback on the data, is it okay if I repeat what you've said?
Yeah.
Or would you rather just not, the content not be in it at all? Just
no,
checking.
Yeah.
Not at all. Okay, just checking. Okay, good. All right. We're waiting for Monique. Okay. So could you just give us like just a few ideas that came up? I have your notes, and I know that I know almost know where 3 of you live. So if there's something I can't read in the notes, I can come back to find out what that meant. So just give us like a few thoughts to come back together and see what are some of the things that stood out to you. Our questions were, what surprised you about the data? What was confirmed by the data that you already knew? What was missing that you thought you would see? And other comments. So we don't have to go one question at a time, but like some things that stood out to you.
One of the things that me and the person I work with talked about is when you look at the number of the professions that were in the room. So like we had some attorneys, counselors, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And for there to not be a realization before the training that trauma is in their work and impacts what they do, to then see after the training they acknowledge now, like, yes, trauma even occurs in my work and what I do. That was the surprising part that we saw. Like, how could you not know? You're a counselor. How could you not know? You're a counselor. How could you not know?
So number of professionals, I wrote it that way to use your words, but basically the number of professionals who didn't see the relevance of trauma to their work.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. Before and then the shift after the training. All right. Any other things that stood out?
So in the knowledge of participants, so it says 76% of people saw trauma as relevant to either their work or life. And I thought that number would be 100. So it's high. It's already really
Yeah.
high. But
Yeah.
I really think. Oh, is that in the attitude?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Relevance of trauma. Oh, I put it over there. Yeah, no, relevance is actually in the attitude.
Oh, okay.
I think it was
Go.
really,
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
I think it was really cool to see the jump about knowledge of skills. There was a huge jump between people that didn't know any trauma-informed skills or care to then by the end of the training, like they knew something. I mean, it was like almost double, which is what you want to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good outcome.
Anything around what the pieces that were missing, that you didn't see, or things that surprised you
I think
because they didn't feel like quite right.
just, this goes to more like definitions and terminology a little bit, but just about how folks saw themselves as survivors and kind of where they played on the spectrum, right? There was one number, I think it was 23%, something like that, that saw themselves as, I don't know how it was phrased, but as a survivor of crime or something like that. But then when you actually think about the data that we kind of just know about what it means to live in Newark, and your relationship
Yeah.
with people that may be a victim of crime or a survivor of crime, that number would just naturally just be higher. So moving forward, how we kind of talk about what a survivor is, and if it's like the secondary trauma that makes you a survivor, and how that is kind of internalized by the people that are actually in the
Yeah.
workshop.
Yeah. And that's why, like, when we look at data, we know that there's like any way you collect data has limitations, right? Like if you do a survey, you're going to get something different than if you sit with people one-on-one. You're going to get something different than if you ask them in a meeting. Like, and we know that. And so, in fact, like when we start getting really in the nitty-gritty with it, we say these are the number of people who reported having trauma be relevant to their lives, right? But between the being it and the writing it on a piece of survey, there are a couple of steps there. There's, do they trust us enough to write it down on a piece of paper? Do they trust themselves enough to admit it to themselves, right? Have they done the work to admit it to themselves? Like there's all these stuff, which is part of why, human's a messy thing. Being human is a messy thing.
I think that why. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I think that's why I have personally experienced trauma. That piece before the training and after the training, when it goes up, how to me how meaningful that number is. That it does go up because we know it's not because people personally experience trauma within the week between session 1 and session 2. It's because there's either an awareness that may be new for them, or a trust of the process and they can share it with others. And I feel like either one of those, to me, is part of healing. You have to kind of name that it's there, and so and that those were meaningful jumps. So yeah.
We were looking at the attitude and behaviors, and we were just curious in terms of something that is missing, we thought could have been added, would be showing a depiction of the difference between the police and the community. Like it had everybody blended together, police and community together to show, but then they...
You mean knowledge change? On which area was this?
The attitude and behaviors.
Attitude and behaviors, okay.
There wasn't one as it related to the officers versus that which would have related to the community specifically. It was all together in one number. And to have it broken apart, that would have been an interesting.
Okay.
There was one piece in there as well, and I'm not the data guy, but
You are now.
right, like what the data says by not saying it, if you will. So there was a percentage of only 30% of the officers saw value or wanted to be engaged more in the advocacy around trauma. So that means that 70% of them still were kind of on the fence, right? They didn't see it as something that they wanted to take up. So just maybe going deeper as to what was it that is kind of holding you up, or what was it that made you say that you wanted to be part of that group that wanted to work more on the advocacy piece?
want that number to increase, but I will say, I was surprised by the number. I thought it was gonna be like 2%, you know, given, just given that it's a challenging profession to do that kind of extra work. So, and, right. But, and it excites me because that has meant that there have been, you know, you've never attended the training, but you've heard about it. And you've heard about it because there are officers who leave that training and they start going to the police chief and the director saying, we need all officers to experience this training. I'll go to a community meeting and they'll come up to me and be like, when am I gonna get called to like go to the training? So they're doing that internal, you know, piece, which is part of this, right? It's not the only step, but it's a step. And you said this in our one-on-one, Will, about we have to have common language to even have a way to even move forward. We need to have like a way of communicating to one another. So, and I feel like these are those steps, and having people excited about it is like meaningful.
So, thank you all for that. Now that you speak data. Last year, when we came together, I tasked folks with a very easy task. Some of the people were in this room and like were up to the task of reducing this project to 3 words.
Okay, that worked.
Right? So I said to them, if we were to break it down into a formula where A plus B plus equals C, what would A plus B equals C be? And I have to say, for those who weren't in the room, it was a phenomenal conversation and a long one, right? Because you can imagine that like we spent like an hour earlier sharing our stories and our experiences, right? There's so much complexity and density, and to be able to do, like to vacuum pack it, right? To make it all condensed into 3 words. In fact, there are more than 3 words in here. You won't be surprised, we cheated. So what we came to was, but here's the formula we came to, which was knowledge plus truth exchange equals trust and accountability, which leads to a healing partnership. And so there's a little bit of a like short-term idea here and long-term idea, right? That the healing partnership takes years of commitment versus the trust and accountability, the trust that we start to see in the space of one training, and accountability that grows over the course of how, like, more and more people being trained. Is that clear?
And systems change.
Yes. Yes. The systems change piece, right? And the advocacy work. So knowledge is clear, like knowledge about trauma. For those of you who are in the training, you know there's a part of the training that is pure, like, knowledge of, like, delivering information. But then truth exchange is actually the place where, right, these 2 sides of the divide, of the so-called divide, actually get to experience each other's truth and learn, like, what is it like to actually be in the shoes of the other person, right? And so truth exchange, that's what truth exchange is. And so the combination of having more knowledge and exchanging these truths leads to more trust and accountability and to healing partnership. So given what you looked at in the data, and given what your experiences with the project have been so far, do you see that your experiences or the data confirm or deny this formula? It may not be the whole formula, it may be pieces of the formula. Like, does this still stand? We did this a year and a half ago. Does it still stand? And if not, where does it? Where does and where does it not? And for those of you who haven't been in the training, you can think about what you know about it and if this makes sense based on what you know about it.
kind of thinking, just from my own, like what I've seen, that the merging of trust and accountability in the same sphere, I almost think that accountability may need to be separate from the aspect of trust, because, like, so looking at it, there's this assumption that trust and accountability may happen simultaneously, and I don't think it doesn't work like that in the room. I think that accountability definitely comes first, because when you find that people are willing to be accountable, there's this sense of a word I think that's missing up there is validation. Because I think when the accountability happens and someone says, oh snap, like, yeah, I did do that, or yeah, we do look at you like that, people kind of go, and there's a sense of like, finally you get it. Like so going back to that example that I'd given before between that woman, the lady officer and the gentleman from NCST, there was this exchange where both of them wanted to be validated, but neither of them were willing to be accountable for their own stuff. Like, they just weren't, and that didn't happen. So because that didn't happen, I mean, there was a truth exchange and there was knowledge, but I think that that sense of accountability has to come first. And then once that accountability comes in, when someone says, yeah, that's me, I got it, then the other person goes, oh, you're right, yeah, I got mine too. And then then they get into this sense of mutual, I see you, you see me, I see where you're coming from now. And there's a validation that occurs. I think that might be a little bit of an amendment, I think, from what I see.
So I try to use them as least as possible, but in evaluees terms, right, these are sort of inputs and these are outcomes. And not really, because of course the knowledge and the truth exchange, as you already know, takes a lot of work to put in, right? So they're not quite inputs, but we know that outcomes take even more work. So if you were to just look at this formula for a second as this is what we put in, which is relatively easier to attain, and this is what comes out, which is relatively harder to attain, would you say that, which side would you say validation is on?
On the other, yeah.
So it is under accountability where I put it. Okay,
Yeah.
just checking.
Yeah.
I was just checking because I wrote it there without reflecting.
I just have a comment about
Sure.
the word accountability. If I'm accountable for something, that means that that's something given to me that I must do. It might be seemingly a play on words, but responsibility, I think, is a little bit better than accountability because I'm responsible. And I think that it gives us a view of responsibility as opposed to it being said you're accountable for this, you're accountable for that. It's just a play on words maybe, but I'm just looking at it being tenderized a little bit more. Accountability is like really like, you're accountable, but it's a difference when you talk about responsibility. And that's just express my opinion.
Can I touch on it? I think that insight's really powerful, and I think is a real tension in the work, actually. So I want to tease it out a little bit, because I find, so accountability is it's coming from the system, right? Accountability is embedded now. So whether you like it or not, these are the things you're accountable for, right? But I think in the training, people are looking for, if you see my humanness, you should, of your own volition, take responsibility and care, right? Because it is both the badge, but the person who wears the badge that is part of this, it's not just the community, it is, we are connected to one another because we love each other, that we do this work. And I feel that tension in the room. Like, you can have every law, policy, bill, at the end of the day, are the humans in those positions, is there a culture of responsibility? But likewise, you can have well-meaning people, but if there aren't systems that are like structured to like guide them to kind of reasonable outcomes, you miss something. So I actually experienced that tension in the training between accountability and responsibility, right?
I'm going to tag on to that actually. I think during the trainings I've actually struggled with 3 words. So responsibility, accountability, and culpability.
Culpability.
Yeah, because, and the way that I kind of differentiate the 3, culpability leads usually to something more negative, and when there is a burden that needs to be carried, or what's the word that you're looking for? When someone's guilty, I guess, you know, that's what you think immediately when you think of culpable. I'm culpable for a wrongdoing. Responsibility, I think that comes from inside the person, the sense of responsibility, and that's very internal, but that's really subjective on the person. I kind of like the word accountability because there's a transaction that I think occurs in the word accountability. Like, to know that I'm accountable for someone and that person's equally accountable to me, there's something transactional. While I think responsibility can be, well, I did my part. I did the part that I'm responsible for. And I think accountability kind of leans to this measure of you got me, I got you. This is the part that, yeah, it's shared. It's shared. There's a shared element to it, as opposed to responsibility, which responsibility may just be solely based upon me, and I'm good. And I think both are important actually within the context of the training. I think where it falls, I actually think responsibility falls under truth exchange. And the reason being is we all need to be responsible for whatever's going on within our psyche, within whatever's going on within our interactions within community, the things that we perceive. I think within truth exchange is an internal sense of responsibility of how we've seen and how we approach. And that's mad real. And I think from that migration, then we get to that point of accountability where it's like, oh shoot, okay, we're kind of with each other now. So like, I may have been responsible for how I see you, or how I treat you, or how I approach you, or how I fail to see you. But now that I'm in the same room with you, we're kind of in a different space. We're in a shared space now, and it just depends on what side you think it falls on. And I think responsibility falls on that green side.
I'm listening to it, but your point was heard, and then we're tussling with these two words, accountability
Right.
and responsibility. But I think in both senses, they can be kind of they can both be imposed or perceived to be imposed, and they can both be assumed.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
I think the important thing, whether we use accountability or responsibility, is that what we are touching on here, what we are trying to capture here, is the self-assumed sense of responsibility or accountability, or whatever word we use. If I can recall what we were meaning, what we were trying to get at when we did this. And I think maybe instead of just parsing those words, maybe we can understand or have that shared understanding that when we say accountability, or if we choose to say responsibility, of what we're referring to is not what we're saying you should do, but rather what the individual is inspired to do as a result of knowledge and truth exchange. That's one piece. I don't know if you wanted to, because I wanted to shift gears a little bit, but let me let you.
I'm hearing everything that everybody's saying, and I have like this internal debate all the time, because I think community policing and living in communities create a power dynamic in some respects, right? And sometimes when I talk to officers in communal settings with community members, officers oftentimes revert back to this sense of, well, the community has a responsibility, right? And sometimes that's a cop-out for me, you know? Because the officer can't have a bad day, right? I hear Ambrose say this thing all the time, right? Officer wakes up, it's your job not to have a bad day and be that best officer that you can be. And on the community side, I don't know how we're talking about them being accountable or responsible for police that are part of this broader system that have for years, like, almost had their foot on their necks, right? So when we use words like accountability and responsibility, it's hard for me as citizen Joe over here to really internalize and understand how I'm supposed to be accountable to a police force or a system that has marginalized me for so long, right? So I guess for the purposes on the back end, right, when we start using words like accountability and responsibility to just get a sense of what we're talking about, but actually practically in a conversation with a community member, what that actually means to them. I think we just need to think a little bit more about, because the perspective may be different because we're in it, as to being outside of the conversation, and then actually having that interaction where, shit, I don't feel accountable for a police officer. Like, why? That's not my job, right? I didn't wake up this morning and put my uniform on to be a black man, you know what I'm saying? Whereas they put their uniform on to be a police officer every day. And I think there's a mutual respect that needs to live there. But just what those dynamics are and how they play on this
No, that
conversation.
makes sense.
I want to insert, because I think what you're saying is so powerful, so critical, and the reason, one of the core reasons why we developed this training is to recognize that there are a couple things going on. First of all, the system itself has screwed everybody, right? It has traumatized everybody. So on a systemic, intergenerational level, you have multiple systems that have imposed and put, you said, the foot on the neck of, right, people of color. And then you have, LaRon mentioned this, right? A friend who just is a person from the neighborhood who wants to join a police force and cares and is from the community and puts on a badge I want to go home every night and I want to, and not right, and that there's a disconnect between human beings who want to do great work and a system that is set up to ultimately do harm. That corrodes the goodwill of people who want to do this work, who want to do good work, and it also just sets up this dynamic where people who really want safety in their communities never feel like they have it. And what's so inspiring about Newark right now is that the mayor and a whole host of leaders and community members are, and police leadership, honestly, are envisioning a way that you can create public safety that's shared, right? Where the burden of what safety looks like is not just the police, right? There are you have the community street team, like the Newark Community Street Team, that's actually helping. And what's incredible is that this is a national movement, so that there are other systems who are actually working to prevent violence, right? In some neighborhoods, 30 to 70% prevention of violence that is in the hands of community members, right? It lifts the burden of it only being law enforcement as the primary, right? It's there are other ways of doing this. There are further upstream methods that actually, and I think that's part of this conversation too, is that when we say responsibility, it is taking back responsibility for safety in the hands of community. We can be financed, we can be resourced to do part of the safety pie, and I think that's part of it. It's a rethinking of how we do public safety, and Newark is actually in that conversation and has put resources into that conversation, into actually implementing those things. And there have been, as a result of efforts already, you're seeing double-digit reductions in violence, right? By adding these, these leaders who are formerly incarcerated, who have eyes and ears on the ground and understand, where these networks are, and actually talking to folks before they do harm and stopping them from doing harm, and then saying, and therefore they're not getting arrested, they're not having that interaction with the, policing as a result. So I just think that the opportunity of this work is to rethink when we say responsibility, to saying, okay, this system as it's constituted is a setup for failure. It's setting us up for
constantly having tension, and we are accountable to the lives of people who's at stake. We're all responsible. It's not, do you know, does that make sense? So like as a community member, I am responsible for the lives of those who are at stake, who put their bodies in like who are being harmed. And if I'm responsible for them, what does that mean I have to do? That when I think of accountability, that's what I'm thinking of. And then how does that arrange us? Well, we need a healing partnership to be accountable and responsible. We need a healing partnership so that it's not traumatizing, right? It's actually, it's not this terrible power dynamic. It's acknowledging that's been the past, but we're actually doing something new.
So I want to add two pieces to the pie here, because I think we are using responsibility. It sounds like the experience of responsibility and accountability is that they mean the same thing, but accountability is harsher, right? When we think of accountability, we think about a finger pointed, kind of like you were saying, right? I think the sense of using accountability, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the reason we use the term accountability, one is because we wanted to look at the system, right? So responsibility can be a very personal thing, and taking responsibility is a very personal thing. But we're committed to systems change, and that's why it's on this side, because it's inside of like how we operate within each system. And I would add that the difference between accountability and responsibility is the role. So we can be responsible as human beings in the same way, but we're not accountable in the same way, just like you were saying, right? So the police officers vow to protect and serve. They're accountable to protecting and serving, right? The community member is accountable in a different way. And it's always, like, being accountable means taking the actions that you have committed and vowed to take based on what you're equipped to do, right? If someone gets shot and a community member runs in to like save the day, no, wait, you're not equipped to do that. Like, that's not your role. You're not accountable for it. But an officer is accountable for protecting the scene, right? For securing the scene. Is that the right term?
Yeah.
Close enough. I was like protecting. It's like there's a term. There's a specific term, and I'm missing it. But you get the sense. It's like the first thing is, okay, protect the scene. Like, create boundaries in a way that nothing gets contaminated. That's the first, and the officer is accountable for that to the system and to the community that has invested him through his vow of that role. So, for instance, Newark Street Team is accountable by the role that they have taken in this big picture for intervening in a way that is not an obstacle to the police force, and actually improves the relationship between the police force and the community. That's what they're accountable for, because that's what their mission is and what they're out to, and that's the role that they play. So it's like different pieces of the puzzle are accountable in different ways. Accountability does not mean I'm accountable to you and you're accountable to me in equal way, because it depends on the role that we're in system-wide. And I think that was the choice, and I think we chose it because it was a harsher word. Because it's easier to get responsibility, it's harder to get accountability.
It's real quick. I'm hearing, I know you're just using examples to help us to capture an idea, a concept. In terms of accountability, police have a professional responsibility. They're accountable in many ways to and for the community. In my mind, and maybe I'm just, wasn't there, but that's not what I am referring to when I'm looking at this equation that's in front of me. When this officer gave the example that he gave earlier about doing CPR and a person dying and recognizing the valuelessness of that life, that's the accountability that means to me. I don't care about securing a scene or what they do according to the law. Do that. Not that it's, do that. But the accountability that I hope comes from the knowledge and truth exchange is that. That's the accountability that I want to see.
And I think one of the thoughts that I was having is, and I don't want to use the word semantics because it's not about semantics, but I think what may support the training is if we're using a word like accountability, clearly defining it in a way where the expectation of what the word means is uniform amongst everybody that's in the room.
I think that's right.
Because I think we all have a different understanding of what that may mean, so that may help.
Yeah.
And we talk about this, talking the same language. So I think we got to be speaking the same language.
Yeah. And I think what I hear in what you said, Monique, is that there are these different levels, right? So it's accountable to the system, to the position, to the vow, to the community.
The preservation of life, essentially.
And that's not legislated.
Right.
That wasn't given.
That's right.
It's not institutionally based, right?
That
Yep.
happened from humanness.
Right.
And
right.
that's what, I would agree with
That's
that,
right.
but I was looking at it from an institutional perspective. It seemed
Which
like
makes
it was
sense.
one-sided, like just police officers, you're
Mhm.
accountable,
Mhm.
and we're not doing anything to
Mhm.
make the difference, but I
So-
would agree from that perspective.
I'm going to put out a provocative question and contradict what I said before, just because I like to do that.
Could I
So is this,
before you
what'd you say?
Can I check in for a second?
Sure.
Hi, team. So, this is the moment in terms of like agreement with the cameras for them to shut down. So that's the agreement we've had. We can open it up and keep them rolling, but that's not the agreement that they shut down now, so we can continue talking. So I just wanted
Okay.
to let folks know. Is
Okay.
there any protest to that or anything like that? Y'all cool shutting them down, or is there anyone like, no,
Are
we're
we-
doing it?
Can we finish this conversation? Do you want to join the conversation in that case? What do you think?
I will join after, you know.
Okay.
The cameras.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's time to shut.
So it's fine.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
While they're doing that, can I just, in case anyone goes to the restroom, I got